So our speaker for today is Dr. Tyler Dohlman from the Iowa State Vet School. He is an assistant professor there and really specializes in reproductive technology, kind of specific to beef animals in general. So he does teaching, big, heavy teaching appointment with several of the classes for the vet students there. And then also he has a research appointment that's focused both on the female and the male side of things as well. So Dr. Dohlman has worked with us on the Beef Center Extension team with a couple different studies, one being a trace mineral bull development study as well. So although Dr. Dohlman does not have a formal extension appointment, he has helped us out with various extension meetings across the state. Maybe you've seen him in person at some of our calving management or other reproductive meetings that we have put on. So today we asked him to cover some of the bull reproduction aspect of the breeding season. So typically we spend a lot of time focusing in on the females coming into the breeding season, but there is a big component too on the bull side that we often forget about. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Tyler.
Thanks, Erica, for the introduction, and glad for the people that are joining us today. Specifically, we'll kind of talk about the bulls because bulls tend to get forgotten about the whole situation with our cow-calf herd, because typically at this point in time of the season, our thoughts are on different things, whether that's finishing up calving, and then also starting some row crop stuff. So tend to kind of forget about the bulls, and just kind of wanted to highlight what the breeding soundness exam means and why it's important, specifically for our beef producers. So obviously you don't get to see my ugly mug, but I was asked to put it on so you know who I am. So if you see me at some point, and say you know my face. So kind of the lay of the land, kind of how this presentation, what I kind of wanted to focus on was kind of the economic importance of why we should do a BSE or breeding soundness exam on our bulls. And what does that all include from a BSE, and what does it actually mean? And then we'll kind of open it up to some questions that you may have. So obviously the purpose of the BSE, obviously understanding the bull or the male carries 50% of the equation. Obviously cow-calf producers only make money when they produce calves and put them on the ground and wean them. And whether you have a background in lot or if you're retaining ownership and feeding out these animals, obviously you have to have the offspring to do that. When we specifically look at breeding soundness exams, because we see roughly a little over 500 bulls here at Iowa State University, anywhere from January, collecting some, Iowa Beef Expo bulls for sale, all the way up to about July 4th. Kind of seems like the end for most bull turnout kind of seems to be at the beginning of July. And over that process, we get a lot of people, we kind of ask questions and they may say, well, we haven't come just from the standpoint that we got busy, with field work or finishing up calving, everything kind of rolled downhill for us. And we just weren't able to bring in the bulls to get semen evaluated, or maybe they've never done it before from the standpoint that they purchased a bull with a satisfactory breeding soundness exam and has never failed them. That's where we kind of get into a situation where when we do have subfertility or infertility, usually is a long-term effect, not getting cows pregnant and obviously producing those offsprings that we need to make money. From an economic advantage, this has been studied multiple times, roughly about $40 to $50 per cow return on investment when you do a BSE on that bull. Understanding that bull is going to cover anywhere from 30 to 40 head. Obviously, it starts racking up the more females he has to be presented to get pregnancies. And really taking the cost into effect, the typical breeding soundness exam on our bulls should cost anywhere from $40 to $50. That's pretty minor when we can just get one cow pregnant that may have seen a bull that was infertile or subfertile. So from a cost basis, the return on investment is even there when we have some of our cow-calf operators that are only maybe 5 head. The return on investment to do that BSE or that exam is fairly important. From a NOMS research, we haven't gotten the updated NOMS quite yet, but this is basically going back to 2007, I believe, was the last NOMS report. Cattle producers utilize the BSE as much or more than preg checks. And still, we're only about 30% of the beef cow calf operation. And it didn't really matter whether we're talking about the university setting or when I was in private practice in Southeast Minnesota, Northeast Iowa. We still probably only touched about 50 to 60% of the bulls that were actually out there. And obviously, in this economic downturn, a little bit in ag economics, and especially the beef market, obviously we need those calves. And so it becomes fairly important that we have to take that cost into consideration. But what is our return on investment when we do that to the bull? Obviously, it's a good insurance policy. So we have a lot of clients that come in, test their bulls every single year. The outcome doesn't change. Their bulls are satisfactory. They can get the job done every year in a timely fashion. And but it's a nice insurance policy to make sure that everything's working properly, that there's no defects with the reproductive system of that bull, and they're still producing good quality of sperm cells to actually do their job of fertilization and achieving pregnancies. Looking specifically at breeding inefficiencies, because we'll talk roughly about subfertile and infertile bulls versus fertile bulls that we examine from a BSE. But anytime we have inefficiency and delay of conception or actually making a pregnancy in those cows, every open cycle, so every 21 days that she's left open, that usually leaves us with a loss of 55 to 60 pounds at weaning weight. Now, obviously, from a standpoint for most of our cow-calf producers that are selling a significant lot of numbers of calves to either a background or a feedlot, they want nice consistency in the group. They don't want 400 weights and also 600 weights in that group. They want a nice even group throughout so that they can put them in their feedlot and then they can finish them out all at the same time. So obviously this is an economic importance instead of having some lower weight cattle in a group. Now, the reason for the purpose of the BSE is to identify those subfertile bulls. We'll talk about the exam itself, the kind of some of the limitations that we have in there. But we do find bulls that are subfertile, whether it's, they might be producing enough sperm cells to achieve a pregnancy, but maybe they're not motile enough, or maybe their morphologic changes from the sperm cell doesn't allow them to have adequate fertilization. And then obviously what we get ourselves into here at the university is identifying bulls that aren't performing. So the bulls have a satisfactory breeding exam, and then all of a sudden we get clients that say, I've been seeing some repeat heats on the cows or heifers, and then we pull the bull back in for another exam, and we find that he is inefficient from reproductive prowess of settling cows or heifers. And so those would be the infertility cases. And what we see a lot is pre-purchase exams. So going out and buying a brand new yearling bull to kind of diversify some genetics in a herd. Obviously, we want a satisfactory breeder status on that bull before any purchases actually happen. That's where we see quite a few of our bulls in January and February for some of the early sales for bulls. But it's a good insurance blanket, not only for the purchaser, but also the seller. Making sure that they did qualify as a satisfactory potential breeder, and they don't have to have the repercussions of somebody purchasing the bull and then coming back as infertile or subfertile. Now, the breeding and soundness exam, obviously we talked about the purposes. We'll talk about the exam itself, the evaluation, and kind of some of my other thoughts. In general, bull BSE in a nutshell is actually a snapshot of the bull's breeding potential on the exam or the date of the exam that it was performed. This basically meaning that if we bring a bull in, we examine him from a thorough breeding soundness exam, qualify him as a satisfactory potential breeder, it doesn't mean that he's going to be a satisfactory breeder for the rest of his life or even for the next day. We could pass a bull satisfactory. The next day you turn him out with cows, he jumps a barbed wire fence and slices his whole scrotum open. Obviously, he's not going to be a satisfactory breeder at that standpoint. So understanding that this is not a cop-out for veterinarians to be like, yep, he passes today, but I can't guarantee you that tomorrow. This is a snapshot of the bull's performance on the day of the exam. But this should be good for a certain time. knowing that we have some limitations of not overusing the bull, providing adequate nutrition to the bull, making sure that we are mitigating any infectious diseases or any from the standpoint of communicable diseases, whether that's viruses or bacteria. But the breeding soundness exam is only good for that day. That's why we try to have them as close as possible to a cell date, or potentially our recommendations are 30 to 60 days out from pasture female turnout. Now there's a bunch of exams when we look at breeding soundness exams in totality, and so there's basically 4 different examinations that we do from a breeding soundness exam. It's not just collecting them and seeing what its semen looks like or sperm cells look like. We should be looking at general physical exam, making sure body condition score is there, doing an internal reproductive exam for accessory sex organs, and then obviously the external genitalia, including the penis, prepuce, and the scrotum and testicles themselves, and then eventually get into the last part of semen evaluation of motility and morphology. Now, going through these individually, obviously general physical exam, we're looking at the general health. So obviously making sure that they're not coming in with snotty noses, lungs sound good, heart sounds good, everything else. And body condition score is probably one thing that always gets missed or gets neglected a little bit. I see way too many bulls that come in, this time of year that are body condition of a 4.5 to a 5. And that's sometimes due to Mother Nature a little bit, or, like last spring where snow didn't really disappear here from the Midwest or here in the state of Iowa until roughly about the end of May. Became a little bit scarce from a nutrition standpoint because a lot of our producers are used to throwing bulls out and cows out by May. And so then our hay supply might get short, maybe silage gets short, and so then we shortchange our bulls because we're trying to feed our cows that just put calves on the ground and are lactating for them. Ideally, we want those body condition scores in that 6 to 7 range because we know that when we turn them out, they're going to have a job to do. They're going to lose some body mass, even though they might be on fresh grass or have adequate grass in the pasture for them from a nutrition standpoint. But you have to remember that these are bulls. They're kind of almost like teenage boys. All they're going to be thinking about is their job, and they tend to forget about eating, and especially from the standpoint that if we have large open area pastures, so if it's 100 acres or plus, obviously they're going to have to move with the herd. That takes a lot of energy demand off of them. Versus if they're in a 10, 15 acre pasture and only have to cover five cows or 10 cows or less, they're not going to lose that much body condition. But most of the time we see bulls lose roughly about a body condition, maybe a body condition and a half, which would equate to 75 to 125 pounds in that first 45 days of breeding season. Now, eyes are important. We can get squamous cell carcinoma, pink eye, cancer eye, or some deterioration of the cornea. We have to remember that bulls heat detect just like us humans. They visually detect. Now, there are some pheromones that they can respond to, but they'll see cows messing around, and then they kind of know what their job is. So we have to make sure that their eyesight is adequate in there. Then also dentition in mouth. If we have some aged bulls that are getting up into that 7-8 year range, we have to look at their mouth to make sure maybe their body condition is so poor because they can't get the nutrition off the ground and put it in their body. And then musculoskeletal. So obviously on the screen here, you can kind of see some correctness of the hind limbs, obviously knowing that that's where most of the weight is going to go on that bull at the time of breeding when they mount and thrust, that there's a lot of pressure that goes on those hind limbs. Straight of legs or even some sickle hocked or bow leg, obviously over a period of time, they're going to break down on their hind limbs and have some lameness issues that aren't going to allow them to do their job of mounting and thrusting and breeding that event. Our internal reproductive exam, almost very similar to a preg check on a female, but here we're going to assess the accessory sex glands, and obviously the prostate, seminal vesicles, and ampulla. They all provide the seminal plasma in the ejaculate with the sperm cells to make sure that they stay alive and can kind of transverse reproductive tract in the female. So this usually is just a rectal palpation. Sometimes ultrasound is used just to make sure that we have normal organs throughout the reproductive side of things in the male. We do see some vesiculitis, especially or inflammation of seminal vesicles in yearling bulls, and there's a potential course of treatment that we can eliminate that. And so that's why we kind of have to evaluate that to make sure, or if we see something on our exam of the sperm cells, if we have a whole bunch of white blood cells in the ejaculate, obviously that would hone in on specific issues with the reproductive tract of the male. External genitalia exam, obviously we're going to look at the scrotum, the testicles within the scrotum, the penis and prepuce, because there is some abnormalities there that could inhibit reproductive performance. Obviously, the scrotal circumference is probably the primary thing that most beef cow-calf producers evaluate when they purchase bulls or try to sell bulls. That's the one indicator of reproductive performance on bulls. Now, the scrotum should be symmetrical in shape. That means the testicles are synonymous. They're a paired organ, so they should feel the same, look the same, and kind of equate to the same diameter and shape and position. Texture should be almost like a firm bicep. Conformational wise, if we start to see some swelling in that scrotum, we could have some potential issues with inguinal hernias, scrotal neck fat, especially in our yearling bulls that basically get fed like feedlot steers. And if there's any blemishes such as frostbite, warts, or scars that could inhibit sperm quality through an ejaculation. So obviously on this bull, on this picture, you can see the frostbite right here on the ventral aspect of the scrotum. Obviously can affect sperm quality because that's where the tail of the epididymis or the storage area of all the sperm cell is before it actually gets ejaculated. Now, scrotal circumference, we take this for multiple different reasons. But obviously we use a scrotal tape measure to kind of get the consistency from bull to bull, and we're taking that measurement from the widest diameter. Now, scrotal circumference importance is it can be used to calculate bull-female ratio. That's a big question that a lot of producers ask me: how many bulls can I put on this female and not overuse him from the standpoint of sperm output? And it does have a relationship, or scrotal circumference does have a relationship with fertility, with daily sperm output. That means the amount of sperm this animal is able to produce on a daily aspect. And so 1 gram of testicular tissue should be producing about 17 million sperm. And over a course of an ejaculation, obviously they're going to probably ejaculate anywhere from 2 to 5 billion cells. And that's plenty, way plenty enough to actually achieve pregnancy, as long as the sperm is adequate from a motility and morphology standpoint. Relationship for puberty, you know, the old tale was the bigger the scrotal circumference, and if I have female offspring, it's going to hasten the puberty to the point that we'll start to see puberty earlier, so then we can get the heifers pregnant in a timely fashion ahead of our resident cow herd. Now, that's been kind of questioned, and it's kind of dependent on a lot of different variables, because we know that reproduction and general traits that we evaluate, whether that's on EPDs or even some genomic tests, it's moderately heritable at best. Typically ranges in that 0.3 to 0.4, but there are some other research that says it's a little bit higher. Same thing on puberty in the bulls is kind of questioned, and this can heavily be dictated on the breed, and then also the nutrition that we provide to these animals, because we know nutrition really dictates a little bit of our reproductive performance, not only on the bulls, but also on the females side of things also. Now, scrotal circumference, Society for Theory, or SFT, that's a group of reproductive veterinarians that kind of make standards. And this is kind of the minimum recommendations that we have from a veterinarian standpoint of scrotal circumference. That means all yearlings less than 15 months have to have a 30-centimeter scrotum to qualify as satisfactory from a scrotal circumference. And then once we get up into that age bulls category, above 2 years of age, bigger than a 34. Now, it doesn't mean that the bull is going to be sterile or infertile or anything like that, but we know that the limitations of this is that we can't utilize this animal, because anytime we look at the breeding soundness exam from a motility, morphology, and the scrotal circumference, we have to have numbers that kind of dictate our decisions of satisfactory potential breeder status or unsatisfactory, or if we want to reevaluate them. This is all taking into consideration that from a beef standpoint, we don't utilize artificial insemination as much as the dairy stance. That we have to understand that these animals are going to do natural cover. That means that they're going to mount, they're going to jump, they're going to inseminate by themselves with the female. So we know if we do have a bull that comes in at 20 months of age and only measures a 30, he can still get the job done. He's just not going to be efficient at it. But that, from a standard standpoint, we just can't pass them just on scrotal circumference. So typically we say he's questionable from a breeding status. Now, if you're getting any cattle from Canada, or if you do any business in Canada, they actually break out the different breeds, because we know that there are some breeds that do have small scrotal circumference. And so they kind of break them out. You can kind of see still the beef breeds that are common here, maybe with the exception of limousines. That 30 to 32 or 31 to 32 is kind of the ideal for that 12 to 15 month animal. But these are the standards. They have a little bit higher standards as these animals grow up. And so you can see the 21 to 30 month is 35 centimeters instead of our 34 here in the United States. So just in case you get cattle from Canada, or if you do any business or try to sell bulls into Canada, they might look at this a little bit closer. Now, going to the penis and prepuce, obviously we want to fully evaluate when we do the electroejaculation of the collection process to identify all the anatomy that is important from the glans penis, the tip of the penis that actually does a searching motion, the sensory organ, to actually know where the vulva or the vagina is before they do the thrust, the shaft of the penis, because obviously we can see some abnormalities there, preputial attachments to the penis from a standpoint of the young bulls. As they get from pre-puberty into puberty, it should kind of break down. And obviously here you can see here on the list that there can be a lot of different things that we can see as abnormal in the penis and prepuce. I will kind of highlight some of them. Persistent frenulum is just kind of a incomplete detachment of the penis and prepuce. We commonly see it on yearling bulls. And then the other one would be preputial lacerations, where we kind of see that on aged bulls. It's usually a breeding injury, kind of goes unnoticed, especially if it happens late in the breeding season of the previous year. And if they don't have quite a bit of swelling, it kind of goes unnoticed. And then they bring them in for a BSE and they're not able to fully extend their penis because it's kind of strictured down. And it takes a surgical correction to actually get them back onto full performance. And here's just some pictures of the external genitalia, a little bit closer on the bull. So the collection technique that we commonly use here in the United States is called electroejaculation. This sends electrical impulses to the electrodes that you can kind of see here. Basically, these sit on the accessory sex organs, such as the prostate and the seminal vesicles. This stimulates the threshold to be lower so that they actually go through an ejaculation event. This is the most consistent and reliable method that we have. Now, you'll have some older practitioners that do it manually by palpating. But if I'm going to bring 100 bulls in to have close to 100 ejaculates for me to evaluate, this is the best method. It's quick. There's been studies that actually show that there's no pain associated with the collection. The downfall are going to be some bulls that just don't respond to electroejaculation. This is a non-physiological response because we are causing them to ejaculate. They're not going through rhythmic electrical impulse of actually going through the ejaculation themselves. The semen quality exam part of it, we're going to evaluate the semen motility. Many practitioners look at gross or individual, but we're looking for those sperm cells that have progressive linear motility. That means that they're swimming in a straight line, that they don't have bent tails and they're swimming in NASCAR circles. Obviously, that doesn't help in fertilization. And then also we're going to look at semen morphology. I'm not going to go through the differences between normal and abnormal and their different classifications of there. We'll just look at some of the most common morphologic changes that inhibit fertilization. Sperm motility, we have the standards fairly low. They just have to have 30% of the sperm cells individually moving in a progressive linear fashion. But we can definitely see bulls that achieve much higher than that. And here's kind of the ratings that we give them from, greater than 70% is very good to good, fair, and poor. Hopefully this kind of works here. This is just an image that we have from our microscope here at Iowa State University. And you can kind of see that most of those sperm cells are swimming. They're swimming in a nice linear fashion. There's plenty of them. And so this would be, one of the very good motilities. I'll play that one more time just in case you didn't see it. So this one would be classified as very good motility. Individual motility would actually see individual cells moving instead of a highly concentrated sperm sample where we can't make heads or tail what's moving and what's not. Sperm morphology is probably the most important factor when we evaluate sperm. Many practitioners or even some lay people out there that evaluate sperm overlook this component, but it doesn't matter how many are moving in a straight linear fashion. If they're not normal morphologically or anatomically, the sperm cells aren't able to actually infiltrate themselves into the oocyte or the egg of the female. And obviously will decrease our fertilization process that will actually give us a pregnancy. And this has the highest predictability of success in natural cover, AI, ET, IVF. It doesn't really matter than motility ever will. So having the higher percentage of normal morphologic sperm cells that can actually do the fertilization event is the most important versus if there's 30 versus 50 or 70% motile at that time. I can't stress it enough that morphology has to be done on sperm cells to get an accurate diagnosis of a satisfactory potential breeder versus a subfertile or infertile bull. Essentially what we do is we stain it. Next slide will kind of show the process of making a stain. The evaluation of basically 100 cells. Satisfactory is definitely greater because we put more importance on the morphology than we do on the motility. And we have to see 70% or greater normal cells out of those 100 cells that we do count. Anything under that is going to be a questionable bull. And if we start to see some pattern of morphological changes, we might be able to evaluate the scrotum itself or the testicles themselves, kind of see if they have testicular degeneration. Are they going to work themselves out of this to actually produce good sperm, or are they just not, they don't have the testicular parenchyma that'll allow that. So that would be the dramatic frostbite or a trauma incident to the testicle itself that will never kind of redeem themselves to actually producing good quality of sperm. Morphology, we just use an eosin nigrosin stain, so the eosin will actually penetrate any damaged sperm membranes and actually show up as pink or red. And this is for the dead sperm too. Dead sperm the integrity of the cell membrane will be lost. They'll pick up the stain and kind of show it as a red or pink. The nigrosin is actually just the background, so we can actually see contrast when we get it underneath the microscope of those sperm cells, and it kind of gives a purple background. This is a pretty easy process to do, so all your veterinarians should be doing it. Here's essentially what a normal sperm cell looks like here on the left. This is a different stain, but you can actually see, these are normal cells. We're not seeing anything abnormal with them from the head to the midpiece to the tail, and that's what we should be evaluating from a morphology standpoint, making sure all anatomy is correct. Here on the actual stain picture, you can kind of see that these heads are taking up some of that eosin stain, so these are probably dead. The rest of the cell looks normal, so we'd actually call them normal. They're just dead cells. Some people will refer to this as a live to dead stain, but we do see a defect here with a bent tail. So the midpiece reflex, and we'll kind of talk about that as being a primary defect that we kind of see in older bulls that haven't been used in a while. Now here's all the different abnormal cells we can possibly see. Obviously, it's a long laundry list, but I kind of highlighted some of the most common ones, proximal droplets being some of the immature cells that haven't really formed into mature fertilizable sperm. And so a lot of times we'll see that on our yearling bulls, for instance. Secondary or minor defects, mid-piece reflexes, or any tail defects, commonly seen on older bulls that haven't been used for a while. So if they got done breeding in August, they kind of sat idle for about 6 months until we're about ready to pull them back up. Essentially, those sperm cells sit in the epididymis or the storage area for way too long. They overmature. That's when we start to see bent tails or even some detached or free normal heads show up in our evaluation. So these are very common normal defects. Here we see this proximal droplet, and that's just a sign of immaturity. This has to get all the way off the tail for this to be a good quality of sperm that can actually do the fertilization. Mid-piece reflexes, detached heads, we've already kind of talked about that being on some of the age bulls that kind of been sitting idle. Here's just a stain that I took a picture of. And obviously this is on an aged bull that's been sitting idle for 6 months. We bring them back in, just a couple of weeks ago, evaluate him for a breeding soundness exam before he goes out to see females. And obviously we can see a lot of these bent tails, mid-piece reflexes, and that's just a sign that he needs to be cleaned out. A lot of people refer this as a clean out or a rusty load or a dead dump. These essentially are sperm cells that are overmatured in the storage area and are not capable of fertilization. So essentially, we put this as a questionable or deferred bull, and we usually recommend, 30 days to reevaluate these bulls. Interesting enough, if we have significant damage to sperm cells, it's kind of like a manufacturing of say, a car. Each part of the testicle and the epididymis, the components or the anatomy of the testicle itself, has each individual part. So it's kind of like a car. So the last thing that probably be put on a car is maybe the steering wheel. So if everything else goes right, except for that last part, basically you have a lemon of a vehicle. It'd be the same thing as a sperm. It's a manufacturing process that everything has to go right, and it takes time. A car isn't going to be built in 10 minutes flat. It takes a given period of time. When we start looking at sperm cells, when they start to develop in the testicle itself and actually reach to the component that they can actually be ejaculated, it takes roughly about 6 days. So if we have any insidious damage or trauma to sperm or to the testicle or the epididymis or the scrotum, it changes the whole manufacturing schedule. And basically, it's going to take 60 days for them to improve. So if we have any lameness, nutritional deprivation, infectious disease such as pneumonia or diarrhea, all those will affect reproduction. Anytime we stress out the body, the first thing to go is reproduction. The last thing to come back is reproduction, because we do have such a long lag period from the spermatogenic cycle or the sperm development. And obviously, you should see documentation anytime you purchase a bull, anytime you bring them in for their annual BSC in the spring. Should capture everything from a body condition score to making sure that the veterinarians are evaluating the exam components that we already kind of talked about, getting a scrotal circumference so we can evaluate it from year to year to make sure nothing's changing, and then obviously our sperm motility morphology. And there's basically 3 classifications. I kind of wanted to point this out. Basically, a classification is what we think this animal is capable of doing. That means natural breeding, natural cover, finding females and doing his job. Satisfactory basically means that he achieved all the standards that we have for him. So if he comes in and he has a lameness, obviously we're going to put him as a classified deferred. That means we're going to fix up the lameness and then we're going to reevaluate him, making sure that he is meeting all the criteria from the exams that we had. But if he checks all the boxes, he's satisfactory potential breeder. Now, I want to reiterate that hopefully you've never noticed me saying fertility from the standpoint of this bull. We are not evaluating the fertility of this bull. We're evaluating his potential breeding aspect. So fertility kind of goes out the window because there's so many different variables that go into that. and that we can have a satisfactory bull, but then he's infertile from the standpoint that, for example, the one thing that we can't evaluate on a breeding soundness exam is libido. So we can bring a bull in, we can collect him by electroejaculation, he checks all the boxes, but say he's a yearling bull and he goes out with females and he has no idea what his job is. Maybe he's very timid, or where he was being developed, he was kind of the lowest bull on the totem pole, and he doesn't know what to do around these females. And so obviously there we would have lack of fertility just because he's not doing his job from a libido standpoint, but he checked all the boxes that we can still classify him as satisfactory, but we still have to watch these bulls. Not a paper that we can hang our hat on and say, yep, this is going to be throughout the breeding season. It's going to be 4 months long or 120 days worth of breeding exposure, and he's going to get every single one of them because the veterinarian said, well, he was good to go. Anything can happen. A fall, a trip, an infectious disease process, any of that can happen. That basically takes that animal, and that's why it's only approved for that day of the exam. Unsatisfactory potential breeder, I'm very hesitant to write down any bull for that matter there, because it's a snapshot. Again, it's a one-day evaluation, so a lot of times we'll classify them as a deferred. Say they didn't pass motility morphology for whatever reason, an age bull that's coming in. Basically, we classify them as deferred. We want a re-examination 30 to 60 days out, and then typically my issue to classify them as unsatisfactory is if there's a very major problem with this bull, or I've tested them 3 or 4 times and I've seen no improvement, and that's typically where I make that communication with the client and say, this might be a bull you're going to be wasting too much time on. But this should be all documented through your breeding soundness exam. The big question I get is stocking rate, bull versus female ratio. It's a common question I ask clients. How many bulls is this, or how many females is this bull responsible for? And this is all considering a 90-day breeding season. Understanding that some people do have extended breeding seasons, maybe 120, 150 days worth. But typically 1 to 20 to 1 to 30 for mature bulls is kind of an old kind of scenario, but obviously we can use a little bit of what we evaluate from a bull to use for our knowledge base, how many females he can cover in a 90-day breeding season, and have close to 95, 98% success rate, knowing that the female adds that other 50% into the equation. On young bulls less than 3 years of age, 1 cow per month of age. So example would be a 20-month age bull. I'd be comfortable setting out with 20 females. That's meaning that he classified as a satisfactory breeder. He should be able to do this. There's one variable I always take in consideration, that if they're going to synchronize females to all come into heat at the same time, it doesn't matter how big the bull is, how old he is, how rampant his libido is, how much scrotal circumference he has. He's not going to be able to breed 20 females in a 72-hour period. It's not going to happen. So this is taken in consideration the natural estrus of the female, that a 20-month-old bull should be able to cover 20 females in a 90-day breeding season. Mature bulls, on the other hand, greater than 3 years of age, 1 cow per centimeter of scrotal circumference, knowing that scrotal circumference dictates testicular production of sperm. So an example is if a bull comes walking in, he's 4 years of age, has a 36 scrotal circumference, I'm comfortable with him, being thrown out with 36 females. Understanding that we do have some herds that maybe have bull battery, so they're throwing out multiple bulls into a group of females. This calculation actually came out of University of Auburn, but they kind of use it, so the equation is kind of set up there. Number of bulls needed, you have to take the number of females in a breeding group, and then the bull age in months, if less than 3 years of age, or the scrotal circumference of age bulls, just kind of what we talked about. So an example would be 100 head of females in a group. Obviously, one bull's not going to be able to do that. So we have to provide enough bull power to cover those females in our breeding season. Say your bulls available are a whole bunch of 4-year-olds with scrotal circumference that average about 38 centimeters. Typically, I always take the highest number and put it in that first part of that equation, or that first end. So if I have a 4-year-old bull that has a 40, I'm going to put him at that 40 in that first end. But here, the example is they all kind of measure at 38. And so 100 minus that 38, that's what the most dominant bull is going to be able to do. He's going to cover those 38 head. That leaves you with roughly 29 or 62 left to actually get bred. And basically, we take the half of the scrotal circumference or half the months of age for each additional bull that's going to cover, because we know one bull is going to try to do all the work, whether that's age difference, social distance, that one bull is going to ultimately take. So in this equation, you need about 3.26 bulls. It equates to 4 bulls because you don't get to 3 1/4 bulls. But if you could actually parcel out your land or your pasture where these females are going to be, and you can single them out, obviously you'd only need 3 bulls to cover that 100 females, because knowing that each bull could take on 38, obviously you'd only need those 3 bulls if they're in single-sired breeding. My final thoughts here. Pre-breeding, obviously we'd like to see bulls before the day that they're going to be thrown out. Now we know that's very common, that this is the only time that they're going to be in the trailer, so they get put up to the vet clinic or vet teaching hospital here. We classify them as satisfactory breeder. They're headed out to the pasture to breed cows immediately. We try to get our producers to be a little bit more proactive, evaluate these bulls, at least 30, if not 60 days out, just from the standpoint that if they aren't satisfactory, if they have some major defect with their reproductive organs, it gives time for producers to figure out a backup plan. From a BSE, obviously, plus or minus some nutritional support, so don't feel bad if your veterinarian says your bull could use an additional 75 pounds before turnout. Then we have time to do that. Vaccinations, obviously, we want an annual 5-way viral component and some lepto and campylobacter on those vaccines. Plus or minus parasite control, knowing that some people use some mineral for some fly control or even some fly tags. It's a good time to do that, especially before fly season kind of takes on. Trim some feet if they need to be attended to, so that they can have their dates out in the pasture without slipping and falling or having any lamenesses that show up later. Any diagnostic tests such as trichomoniasis, I'm going to briefly go over this. Obviously, trick is a fairly important disease process because it is spread venereally, so it's a bovine STD. It's an obligate protozoan that is a chronic carrier in the bulls. So they're asymptomatic. You're not going to see any signs of it. They're the carrier state. So anytime that they breed a female, they'll give it to the female. And what we commonly see, there's a lot of effects on reproduction, but the most common one is early pregnancy loss. So it looks like they got pregnant. They might get out, 40 days, and then you see a repeat heat because they lost that early embryonic loss. So that's where we start to shift from an early breeding or calving and breeding season to now a later. That's where we tend to lose a little bit more of our females in a herd. Obviously, this is a requirement from the state, especially if they're over 24 months of age or if they're non-virgin. So if you're going to purchase a bull, make sure, if they're under 24 months of age, that they are virgin. And if they're over 24, or if you're leasing a bull to your neighbor, anything like that, or if you have poor fences, that this should probably be a significant test that should be done on a yearly basis or any time that you get the bull back in your possession. It's a pretty easy diagnostic test. We can do traditional scraping through the prepuce. The test itself, roughly for the procedure and the test, is going to be roughly about $50, but they'll cover any issues that you might have of cows that didn't get pregnant or shifted from the early breeding season to the end, and having less open cows during preg check time. We kind of developed a new technique here. This is nice because when we use electroejaculator, we tend to see the penis and prepuce, where basically the protozoan of trick settles in. That we just take a swab, since we already have the electroejaculator in them. Getting a BSC is a good, perfect time to actually do our sample technique and get submitted to the lab to confirm negative status for trichomoniasis. So my last thoughts, I'm not a philosopher by any means, but I know this is a tough time currently for not only the general population with public health concerns, but for the poor economy, for the agriculture. We're in this together, and if you need any help or assistance, don't be afraid to kind of reach out. The Iowa Beef Center, your beef program specialists, your veterinarians here at Iowa State. We're all here for you. And don't forget why you're in the cattle business. I know it's a hard time to kind of evaluate, making money. It's hard to do, but there are many tough decisions to make. Your cow-calf operation run successfully, and the one good thing that you can do is test your bulls from a BSE standpoint. If you don't, there might be some short-term and extreme long-term issues putting calves on the ground and not having any income rolling in for multiple years. Don't forget about your bulls. Remember that they dictate 50% of your calf crop, but they're not 50% of your animal herd. Obviously, you can run quite a few females to one bull, and so if the bull can't do his job, then obviously we have this swaying of the ratio and not getting calves on the ground. Be healthy, be safe, and continue to make good decisions. And obviously, we're all here for help. Here's your beef program specialist. If you don't know where they're at in the districts here in the state of Iowa, definitely reach out to them. They'll be more than happy. And then obviously at the ISU campus here with Beth, they're all very good individuals and eager to help with anything that you may have. Just a plug, Thursday, the next webinar will be with Patrick Wall, one of the district reps, and he'll be talking about heterosis and capturing the benefit. And if you missed one, again, like Erica said, you can go to the Iowa Beef Center website and find the previous webinars. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have. If you think about questions later on, don't hesitate to email me here. And then this is the hospital phone number, and the lovely ladies up front will get a hold of me if you have any questions about bulls or reproduction in general in your beef cattle. Obviously, we're here to help. So, and this has just been my time with the COVID pandemic. I get to spend more time at home with my little boy, and obviously I'm raising him right with cattle, and it's amazing what an empty livestock trailer does to entertain an 18-month-old. So with that, I'll take any questions, but I thank you for listening in, and hopefully you learned something. And go from there.
Thanks, Tyler. Lots of good information there. So participants, if you have questions, again, just look for your little icon towards the bottom of the screen. Type your question in there, or there is the 3-dot icon that you can also click on, and then there's something else that'll pop up that'll say Q&A. So you can go ahead and type your questions into there now. Tyler, we did have one that has already came in. And so that question was, is there anything that you can see underneath the microscope that indicates if a bull is a good candidate for sex sorting of his semen?
Yeah, so obviously, we want to do a thorough BSE exam, especially looking at motility morphology is our first step. Obviously, we freeze a lot of semen here at Iowa State also, and so our standards go up a lot higher to actually go through the cryopreservation of sperm, because we know that we're going to lose sperm death through the freezing process and then also the thawing process. Typically with sex semen is we have to have enough data to support that these bulls can be frozen or cryopreserved conventionally. So that means just not sorting them, going through the freezing and thawing process, and making sure that they're successfully getting pregnancies on females through artificial insemination before that next step going into sex semen. The sex sorting process is definitely an advanced technique, but we know that we do stress and damage those sperm cells dramatically more than what we do conventionally. And that's where we see, loss of conception or preg rates using sex semen. But obviously it first starts underneath a microscope to start involving more questions of cryopreserving it, whether conventionally or actually going through the sex sorting process. We have a question. You discussed symmetry of the question is you discussed symmetry of the scrotum, but what about scrotums that appear twisted? How does this impact breeding soundness? So you will come across the scrotum shouldn't be twisted, hopefully, but you might have an offset testicle that maybe doesn't align or look the same shape as the other testicle. And most of the time, as long as the firmness and everything else aligns, and I'm not the bull's not in any pain when I actually palpate that testicle. Sometimes we do have a testicle. There are multiple ligaments that kind of hold the testes in place in the scrotum, so there might be a little bit of weakening in that ligament. But most of the time, we do not see impact from motility morphology or any breeding activity. But if there's any concern, when we evaluate and then get underneath the microscope, we might take a second look, potentially if it's impacting vasculation to the scrotum. But typically we see a size difference if we're having any type of defect with the testicle itself. But you will see some offset. I wish I had more pictures with scrotum on my presentation, because you can see them all different. Some can be bell-shaped, some can be fairly flat, but as long as they're symmetrical and they're adequate on scrotal circumference and everything looks underneath the microscope well, I wouldn't get too concerned about the scrotum not looking perfectly symmetrical. I'm more concerned about the testicles inside of that scrotum.
Okay, Tyler, here's another one. 38 cows, 3 bulls split into 2 equal size groups will sync each group 1 week apart, the 3 bulls with the first group, commingle all the cows after the second group is synced. What are your thoughts?
Whoa, you want to repeat that? 38 cows, yes. 3 bulls.
Yep, split into 2 equal size groups.
Okay.
So the first group, they will sync and then sounds like turn the bulls in, and then the next week they will sync the second group and then turn those cows into the first group with the bulls and the cows previously synced.
No artificial insemination, or they're just synced up to come in to heat?
It does not specify, so I'm going to assume that we're just using natural breeding with the bulls, no AI.
Okay, so yeah, when we synchronize females, I mean, there's a lot of people that might use MGA, for example, especially on heifers, that they might use MGA and then start pulling a few animals off of MGA gradually. Or if we're doing some type of synchronization, obviously there's a whole slew of synchronization programs out there. And I would say that most people are probably using, a cheaper version instead of using cedars or anything like that. They might be giving prostaglandin, so luteolized or estromate. And so in this scenario of 38 cows, and we split them up in 2 equal groups, let's just say there are 40 cows and there's 20 in each pair or each set. When we give prostaglandin, for an example, in a synchronization protocol, we're going to have spread out of that group. That not all, we don't have tight synchrony in that group. So those 20 cows aren't going to all come into heat 2 days after the injection. They're going to be spread out from, cows that are already going to come into heat. They're going to start showing heats, the next, we're going to have the big chunk of animals. And I would say it's only going to be about 50% of those. So only 10 of them come in from, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days out. That it's not going to be tight synchrony. The problem with synchronizing animals and requiring natural service on our bulls is now we're expecting, especially if it's a tight synchrony, then our hope or our expectation is, majority, 70% or greater, are actually going to show a heat in a specific time. So the question is kind of dictated a little bit on the answer from the standpoint what synchronization protocol we're doing. But in the case of using prostaglandin, having 20 animals and 3 bulls, you should be fine because you're still only going to have 10 that actually respond to your injection. They're going to be spread out between 4 days. So at most you might have, 4 cows in heat on the same day, but you have 3 bulls. They're still going to do their job. So the limitation kind of comes on the factor of what synchronization protocol we're instituting, and then, what our expectations are. Knowing that also for most of our cows, they might still be struggling to actually respond to those drugs because they might be in a negative energy balance by lactating. So not all of them. That's why you don't get 100% to respond to your injections. That's why you only get 50, at most 60% of the animals actually respond to a prostaglandin one shot dose. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, Tyler. So they are using AI. So I'm assuming that what you just said, it basically sounds like that's an okay approach to take. So then when we're adding AI into it as well, that should probably be even better, correct?
Yep. So if we're synchronizing for artificial insemination, obviously, if it's timed artificial insemination, that means everybody's seeing semen. We know that all of them aren't going to respond, but hopefully the AI goes well, and that you capture 50 to 60%, if not a little bit more, conception on that first go around. So in that scenario, if we have 20 head, and say our AI conception rate is 50%, we're still dealing with 10 cows again, that some didn't respond, and that's why they didn't get pregnant from artificial insemination, or fertility was bad or whatever. That again, the scenario kind of falls into that same category of only having 10, still bridging out, not specifically coming in the heat at the same time. Even on the repeat, they'll kind of spread themselves out a little bit, especially for 3 bulls, for that half group of 10 animals.
Okay, and one more question. Any difference in sampling bulls electro versus artificial vagina?
No. So since we're fairly close to Nichols and Hawkeye Genetics, if we have a bull that comes in for a BSE and for whatever reason doesn't respond to electroejaculation, we have a good agreement, a good relationship with those 2 bull studs here locally in central Iowa, that we'll usually give them a call and say, hey, can you collect this off of a jump, off of an artificial vagina, just to get an ejaculate so that we can perform a thorough BSE, and vice versa. We have some bulls that go to those bull studs that get collected and they don't want to jump them out. They're a little bit timid. They don't know what's going on. And then those bull studs call us up and we do electroejaculation. But there is no difference. You'll dilute down the sample a little bit with the artificial vagina, just from the standpoint that they give you everything. That means everything from the prostate, from the seminal vesicle, so on and so forth. With the electroejaculation, we can actually fractionate it out. So they'll give a lot of pre-sperm ejaculate until it starts to turn white or milky. Then that's when we start collecting it. But there is no difference from a motility or morphology if we did a side-by-side comparison on the same bull collecting off of electroejaculation or off of artificial vagina.
All right, I think that's all the questions that I see. Tyler, did you get any more privately?
I did not.
Okay, perfect. I think we are good to go then. So thank you for joining us today, Tyler, and sharing your knowledge, and thanks to our participants for joining on such a nice day.